I never questioned a single request, never hesitated to pull out my credit card or log into my bank app, never thought twice when my parents called with yet another, unexpected expense that somehow always needed to be covered immediately. It started small, just a little help with groceries when they said money was tight, then a bit toward their electricity bill when the late fees piled up, and before I knew it, I was shouldering almost all their financial responsibilities without ever stopping to ask why. Rent, utilities, car repairs, medical bills, anything they needed, I provided, because that's what a good daughter does, right? It wasn't that I was rolling in cash or living some glamorous life where money flowed like water. No, I worked hard, long hours, overtime whenever I could get it, skipping vacations and rarely treating myself to anything extravagant because in the back of my mind, I knew I had a duty. My parents had raised me, supported me through college, and given me a roof over my head when I was younger. So I told myself I owed them. And for 10 years, I paid. Then, one random Thursday afternoon, my entire world changed with a single email. We regret to inform you that due to company downsizing, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. Just like that, after years of loyal service, I was unemployed. It didn't even feel real as I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over as if somehow they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. The panic set in fast. My rent was due in 2 weeks, my emergency savings weren't as robust as I'd always promised myself they'd be, and the thought of going from a comfortable, stable income to nothing overnight made my chest tighten with anxiety. But I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I wasn't alone. My parents, whom I had never failed, would surely be willing to help me, just this once, just for a little while. That night, I called my mom, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to let the sheer terror seep into my words. "Hey, Mom," I said, forcing a little laugh. "Got some bad news today. I lost my job, and, well, I could really use some help covering rent for a couple of months while I figure things out." There was silence on the other end, a long, heavy pause that made my stomach twist. Then she sighed, in that way she always did when I was a child asking for something unreasonable, like ice cream before dinner. "Rachel, we can't support you," she said, her tone cool, detached, as if she were talking to a stranger. "You're an adult. You'll figure it out." I actually pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen as if it could somehow clarify what I'd just heard. I'd expected concern, maybe a little hesitation, but this was something else entirely. "What?" I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "You'll figure it out," she repeated, this time with a little impatience, like she was scolding me for even asking. "We're not in a position to help you." Not in a position? I had spent 10 years making sure they never had to worry about bills, stress over rent, or scramble to cover an emergency. I had given up vacations, nice things, and financial security to make sure they were always comfortable. And now, the very first time I needed them, they couldn't be bothered. I wanted to argue, to remind her of every dollar I had funneled into their lives without a second thought, but I realized something in that moment that made my blood run cold. She didn't care. My mother wasn't apologetic, wasn't sad, wasn't even grateful for everything I had done over the years. To her, this was just the natural order of things. I was the provider, and she was the recipient. And the moment I stopped being useful, well, that wasn't her problem. I ended the call without another word, my hands shaking as I set my phone down on the kitchen table. It felt like something inside me had snapped, like a decade of blind loyalty had suddenly shattered into tiny, irreparable pieces. That night, I made a decision, one that should have been obvious years ago, but had somehow never crossed my mind. No more money. Not a single cent. Not another bill. Not another grocery run. Not another emergency payment for some mysterious debt that never seemed to go away. I was done. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating on my nightstand. My mother's name flashed on the screen, the first of what would soon become many, many calls. I let it go to voicemail, staring at the ceiling as my heart pounded in my chest. Then another call. And another. The silence I had expected didn't come. Instead, it began. The first call came early in the morning, long before my alarm was set to go off, piercing the quiet of my apartment with its sharp, insistent vibration. I groggily reached for my phone, squinting at the screen, and saw my mother's name flashing. A part of me, the old, conditioned part, almost picked up immediately, but then I remembered the night before, the cold indifference in her voice when she told me I was on my own. My finger hovered over the answer button for a moment before I flipped the phone over and let it ring until it stopped. Minutes later, another call. And then another. By the time I got out of bed, I had 7 missed calls, all from my mother. No messages, no texts, just an aggressive, desperate need to get me to pick up. My stomach twisted, a mix of anger and something more bitter, resentment, maybe, or the slow realization that this wasn't concern. This was control. I showered, dressed, and tried to go about my morning as usual, but the calls didn't stop. On my way to work, my phone buzzed in my bag every few minutes, the repeated interruptions gnawing at my already frayed nerves. Finally, at a red light, I took a deep breath and played one of the voicemails, her voice filling the car in that familiar, sing-song way she always used when trying to sound sweet, but hiding something sharp beneath the surface. "Sweetie, I just wanted to check in on you," she said, a little too casually. "I know you were upset last night, but I didn't want you to start your day thinking we don't care about you. We love you so much, honey. Just call me when you get a chance, okay?" I knew better than to fall for the act. I had spent my whole life navigating my mother's subtle emotional manipulations, the way she twisted things to make herself seem warm and caring, only to flip the second she didn't get her way. This was just the beginning, the gentle knock on the door before she started pounding. I ignored the call, went to work, and tried to focus, but by lunchtime, my phone had racked up over 20 missed calls. The next voicemail wasn't so sweet. "Rachel, I don't understand why you're acting like this," she said, her voice tight with irritation. "We have bills coming up and we were counting on you. You know how hard it's been for us. Rent is due in 3 days, and if we don't pay, we could be in serious trouble." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Rent. The same rent I had covered every month for 10 years without question, without hesitation, without fail. And now, 3 days after I stopped paying, they were suddenly on the brink of disaster? I knew better. I had seen my parents spend money recklessly, going out to eat when they claimed they couldn't afford groceries, buying new gadgets and clothes while I sacrificed to keep them comfortable. I sent a simple text. "I can't help you." Less than a minute later, my phone rang again, this time my father's name flashing across the screen. He never called, not unless it was something serious. That alone made my stomach twist, but I wasn't falling for it. I let it ring. Then came the voicemail. "I hope you realize what you're doing," my father's voice boomed through the speaker, colder than I had ever heard it. "After everything we've done for you, you turn your back on us the first time we need help? You're selfish, Rachel. I don't know how you live with yourself." I nearly laughed at the audacity. Everything they'd done for me? I was the one who had taken care of them for a decade. But in their eyes, my role had always been clear. I was the provider, and they were the takers. The moment I stopped, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was the enemy. By the end of the day, they had called my work phone twice, my personal phone over 40 times, and had left enough voicemails to fill my inbox. I finally snapped and blocked them both. The silence was immediate. For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't have to check my bank account in fear of another withdrawal, didn't have to hold my breath every time my phone rang, didn't have to shoulder their burdens while they lived comfortably on my dime. That night, I slept better than I had in months. But it didn't last. The next morning, I walked into work and was immediately pulled aside by my manager. "Rachel, we got a call from your mother this morning," she said, looking at me with concern. "She was in a panic, saying it was an emergency and she couldn't get a hold of you. We didn't know what was going on, so we transferred her to your line." I felt my stomach drop. "She left a message for you," my manager added, handing me a slip of paper with the company voicemail number scribbled on it. Hands shaking, I dialed in, listening as my mother's voice, calm but laced with something sinister, poured through the speaker. Rachel, I know why you're doing this. But you don't know the whole story. I hung up, staring at the phone in my hand. She wasn't done with me yet. The first few days after I blocked their numbers felt like freedom wrapped in an unfamiliar silence, a kind of peace I hadn't experienced in years, yet still tinged with an underlying unease that refused to let me fully relax. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart jumped, my fingers hesitated before checking, half expecting them to find a new way to reach me. But the calls had finally stopped, and for the first time in a decade, I could breathe without feeling like someone was reaching into my wallet at the same time. Still, my mother's last words echoed in my mind, digging in like a splinter I couldn't ignore no matter how much I wanted to. You don't know the whole story. That single phrase gnawed at me, turning over in my head at night, making me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had misunderstood something. But then the anger would return just as quickly, reminding me that I had spent 10 years unquestioningly throwing money into a pit I assumed was bottomless need, only to be discarded the moment I needed help myself. But what if it hadn't been need at all? The thought came suddenly, sharp and insistent, and before I could talk myself out of it, I found myself sitting at my desk, laptop open, fingers hesitating over the keyboard as a familiar, creeping unease settled over me. I had never, not once, questioned where the money went after I sent it. Never checked their bank statements, never asked for receipts, never even thought to look because I had trusted them. I had trusted them. And now, that trust felt like the biggest mistake of my life. I took a deep breath, logged into my bank account, and started scrolling through years of transactions, my stomach twisting as I saw just how much money had left my hands and gone straight into theirs. Thousands. Tens of thousands. So many payments labeled as help or emergency, so many automatic transfers I had barely registered at the time because I had convinced myself it was the right thing to do. But something felt wrong. I knew what struggling looked like. I had lived paycheck to paycheck before, had learned how to stretch every dollar, had skipped meals to make sure bills got paid. And yet, when I pulled up their bank records I had access to because at one point, they had made me a secondary on their account for convenience, I didn't see struggle. I didn't see desperation. I saw luxury. Spa charges, fine dining, high-end shopping sprees, transactions at boutique hotels, even payments to a personal trainer. I scrolled faster, my hands trembling as I watched the truth unravel in front of me, years of blind generosity laid bare in numbers that told a story far different from the one they had always fed me. They hadn't been scraping by. They had been living comfortably, even extravagantly, off my money. I felt physically sick. All those times I had skipped vacations, ignored my own needs, told myself that family comes first, they had been spending my hard-earned money on facials and five-star restaurants while I exhausted myself trying to keep them afloat. It wasn't even just the necessities I had been paying for, it was their entire lifestyle, a lifestyle I hadn't even allowed myself to have because I was too busy playing the role of the dutiful daughter. I grabbed my phone before I could second-guess myself, unblocking my mother's number and dialing with fingers that barely felt like my own. The phone barely rang before she picked up, her voice smooth, almost relieved. "Rachel, honey, I was hoping you'd call back," she started, her tone light, as if we hadn't spent the past week locked in silent warfare. I didn't waste time. "How long?" I snapped, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "How long have you been lying to me?" Silence. Then, a carefully measured sigh, the kind she always used when she wanted to make me feel like I was overreacting. "Rachel, I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but there was something off, something tight and cautious in her voice. I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "Don't lie to me, Mom," I spat. I looked at the bank records. I saw the charges. The luxury purchases. The spa days. The secret savings account. "You weren't struggling, you were using me." Another pause, longer this time. Then, finally, she spoke again, her voice softer now, almost placating. "We never wanted to burden you with our real problems," she murmured, as if that somehow made it better, as if that erased 10 years of deceit and manipulation. I almost dropped the phone. Real problems? The audacity of those words made my blood boil. What real problems? The only problem they had was that they had found a golden goose and didn't want it to stop laying eggs. Bullshit, I snarled, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. You've been lying to me this whole time, making me feel guilty while you lived off my money like leeches. Rachel, sweetheart, it's not like that, she tried, but I wasn't listening anymore. My eyes flickered back to the screen, and that's when I saw something worse. Something that made my stomach drop even further. Because hidden beneath the luxury expenses, tucked between the spa trips and the dinners at high-end restaurants, there were repeated, large transfers to a name I didn't recognize. A name that had no reason to be there. Stephanie Carter. Who the hell was Stephanie Carter? I clicked on the transactions, seeing the pattern emerge, a steady siphoning of money, thousands of dollars funneled to this mystery woman over the years. My breath hitched in my throat as a sickening realization started to form, a possibility I did not want to believe. I looked back at the phone, my mother still talking, still spinning whatever web of excuses she thought would keep me under her thumb. I cut her off with a single, cold sentence. Who is Stephanie Carter? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I sat there for a long time, staring at the name on the screen, my mind racing through every possible explanation, each one worse than the last, each one twisting the knife just a little deeper into the place where my trust used to be. Stephanie Carter. The name meant nothing to me, and yet it was there, buried beneath years of transactions, hidden between the so-called emergencies and fabricated hardships, tucked away like a secret they never thought I would find. The dates stretched back further than I could have imagined, months and years of my money funneled into the pockets of a stranger, someone who, if my instincts were even half right, had no reason to be receiving it unless something far worse was at play. I could have ignored it. I could have buried my head in the sand the way I had for the past decade, pretended it was nothing, told myself it was some distant relative or an old friend they were helping out, but deep down, I already knew the truth. And now, for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them lie to me anymore. The anger propelled me forward, sharp and unforgiving, turning my hesitation into determination. I needed answers, and I was done waiting for them to be handed to me. I dug deeper, searching for anything that would confirm my worst fears, my heart hammering as I pieced together the digital breadcrumbs of betrayal. The transfers were regular, consistent, always in increments that would seem small enough not to raise alarms, but over time, they added up to tens of thousands of dollars. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. This was deliberate, calculated, and not an accident. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, barely remembering the drive to my parents' house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my blood was a storm in my veins, an unrelenting current of fury that burned away any last traces of guilt or hesitation. They had used me. They had lied to me. And now, they were going to answer for it. My mother opened the door, a carefully crafted expression of surprise already settling on her face, her lips parting as if she had planned some greeting, some attempt at false warmth to ease the tension between us. But I didn't give her the chance. Where's Dad? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. She hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, her eyes flickering with something unreadable before she stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room where my father sat, flipping through a newspaper as if his world hadn't just come crashing down. The moment he looked up and saw me, something in his expression shifted, something cautious, something aware. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice calm, controlled, the voice of a man who had spent his entire life lying without ever getting caught. I didn't sit down. I didn't ease into it. I just pulled out my phone, opened the bank records, and shoved the screen toward him, the name Stephanie Carter highlighted for emphasis. Who is she? My voice was steady, but inside, I was already screaming. My father's face didn't just fall, it collapsed. For the first time in my life, I watched him struggle for words, his mouth opening and closing, his hands tightening into fists against the arms of the chair as if he could physically hold onto the last shreds of whatever lie he had prepared. "You don't understand," he finally muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." I laughed then, a cold, hollow sound that felt foreign even to me. "Oh, I think it's exactly what I think," I snapped, my patience gone, my fury sharpened into something lethal. "I think you've been using my money to support your mistress, and I think Mom has known about it this entire time." I expected denial. I expected anger. I expected the usual deflections, the rehearsed lies, the desperate attempts to gaslight me into questioning my own reality. But what I didn't expect was silence. My father didn't deny it. And worse, my mother didn't look surprised. That was what did it. That was the moment the final piece clicked into place, the last, shattering blow that left nothing but the raw, ugly truth in its wake. She had known. She had known, and she had let it happen. She had allowed my money to fund his affair, had sat there and let me break myself trying to support them while he lavished gifts and security on another woman. The betrayal was a living, breathing thing inside me, something I could feel clawing at my ribs, making it impossible to breathe. "How long?" I whispered, the words barely making it past my lips. "How long have you been using me like this?" My mother sighed, long and slow, as if she were the one who had been wronged, as if she were the victim in this twisted, disgusting reality I had just uncovered. "Rachel," she said, and for the first time, I could hear it in her voice, the exhaustion, the careful resignation of someone who had already accepted her own guilt. "We didn't have a choice." I actually felt myself laugh. A sharp, bitter laugh that cut through the room like glass shattering against concrete. "No," I said, shaking my head as I took a step back, suddenly feeling like I was suffocating inside the house I had grown up in. "You had a choice. You just chose this. You chose to betray me, to use me, to lie to me for 10 years. You had a choice every single day, and every single day, you made the wrong one." My father looked away. My mother didn't. And that was when I knew they weren't sorry. They weren't ashamed. They weren't even particularly shocked that I had found out. Because in their minds, this had always been my role. The provider. The doormat. The daughter who would never say no. I felt something inside me break. And then I smiled. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm, my hand steady as I took my phone back and slipped it into my pocket. "I am an adult. And I just made a very adult decision." I turned and walked out the door without looking back. I already knew what I had to do next. I don't remember driving home that night, don't remember walking into my apartment or setting down my keys, don't remember anything except the cold, steady certainty that settled deep inside me, something sharp and unforgiving that refused to be ignored. I had spent 10 years giving them everything I had, breaking myself to keep them comfortable, sacrificing my own happiness so they could live without worry, and in return, they had drained me dry and discarded me like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing, not anymore. I wasn't their puppet, their bank account, their fool. And for the first time in my life, I was about to make sure they felt it. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started with the simplest, most immediate step. I canceled everything. Every automatic payment, every standing transfer, every bill that had my name attached to it. I pulled up their accounts, the ones they had made me a secondary on for convenience, and with a few clicks, I severed the financial lifeline they had come to depend on for the past decade. It was shockingly easy, almost too easy, to undo years of blind generosity in mere minutes, to watch their accounts shrink to nothing as my money stopped flowing in. I imagined them waking up the next morning, expecting their bills to be covered as usual, only to find that there was no money left, no cushion to fall back on, no safety net to catch them because I was the safety net. And I had just cut the rope. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. I went deeper, following the trail of deception they had left behind, tracking every questionable expense, every unexplained withdrawal, every shady transaction that had seemed insignificant at the time but now stood out like flashing neon signs. That's when I found it, my father's secret bank account. The one he had been using to fund his affair, the one he had hidden under layers of lies, the one he thought I would never find. But I did find it. And I knew exactly what to do with it. A few quick searches told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't just been stealing from me, he had been cheating the government too. Years of unreported income, hidden transactions, a carefully constructed paper trail designed to keep the IRS from noticing. But I noticed. And so would they. It only took a single, anonymous report, a neatly compiled set of documents attached to an email, a few paragraphs outlining years of undeclared income and financial misconduct. I hit send and sat back, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of 10 years start to lift from my shoulders. But I still wasn't done. Stephanie Carter. The woman who had unknowingly lived off my money, the woman whose luxury lifestyle had been funded by my sacrifice, the woman who had no idea that every gift, every dinner, every expensive trip had been stolen from a daughter who had never questioned why her parents always needed more. I found her social media first, a carefully curated collection of smiling photos, lavish vacations, diamond jewelry, and designer clothes, all of it proof of the life my father had given her, my life, my money, my stolen years. I took a breath, opened my messages, and started typing. Hi Stephanie, I think you should know the truth about where all that money has been coming from. I attached the records, the transactions, the proof of every dollar my father had funneled into her account while his own daughter struggled, while his own daughter gave up everything to make sure he never had to. I didn't add anything else. I didn't need to. And then, just for good measure, I made one final call to my parents' landlord. I had covered their rent for years without a second thought, had assumed they were struggling like they always claimed, had believed every sob story about how they were barely scraping by. But now, looking at the records, I saw the truth. They hadn't been paying the full amount. Every month, they had sent a partial payment, assuming that I would always cover the rest, that I would always come through at the last second to make sure they kept their home. Not anymore. I explained everything to the landlord, sent him the records, made it clear that my money was no longer part of the equation. He was silent for a long moment before he finally spoke, his voice flat. They're already behind by 2 months, he said. If they don't pay up in full soon, they'll be out by the end of the month. I hung up without responding, my heart pounding in my chest, my fingers gripping my phone so tightly they ached. And then, finally, I let it all go. The eviction notice came 3 weeks later. I knew because my mother called me, again and again, over and over, voicemail after voicemail, message after message. But I didn't answer. Not once. I didn't answer when she begged, when she screamed, when she cried, when she tried every manipulative trick she had ever used on me before. I didn't answer when she called from different numbers, when she pleaded for just one conversation, when she tried to guilt me into believing this was my fault. And then, one night, when I was lying in bed, my phone buzzed one last time. A single voicemail. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed play, her voice shaking, her breath ragged. Rachel, please, we have nothing left. Please, just call me back. Please. I listened to the silence that followed, to the weight of everything that had come before, to the decade of sacrifices, betrayals, and stolen years wrapped up in one final, desperate plea. And then, without a second thought, I deleted the message. I finally did what they told me to do. I acted like an adult.